in workshop format this evening. Just a quick reminder for anybody watching online or in attendance tonight is that, so tonight we are in a workshop setting, which is an informal working session of council. Anything that we discuss tonight that will require official action will come back before council and official city council meeting for action. So tonight is intended to just be a working session. We have a number of items on our agenda this evening. First item is open forum. And Karen, do we have anyone signed up for open forum?
I don't believe so. Let me look at the page, but no. No, we do not. But I do have John Harris online with us, so I believe he's part of the conversation we're having.
Excellent. With that, we'll go back to our regular agenda. And our first item this evening is the downtown redevelopment concept plan. And Abby, I believe you're kicking this off.
Thank you, Mayor Bain, council members. Staff has been working with Gahn Companies and Harris Associates on what we initially dubbed as a preliminary concept plan for the downtown redevelopment of a city block downtown. Karen, could you turn on the my screen, please? The concept plan envisions a multifamily rental building with 111 units in 5-story building flanked by restaurant on the north side and retail, a little bit of retail on the south. Let me try again. But now I got, oh, there we go. I'm all black screen. Oh, there we go. Moving right along. So again, there is a restaurant, 2-story restaurant on the north side of the building. Inside the building would be 111 residential rental units, some of those included in townhome walk-up style units facing Highway 61 or Lake Street, and a little bit of retail on the south end. The project envisions a 2-story parking deck, so it's not a ramp. It doesn't have an internal circulation system, but from street level, you'd be able to go slightly down into one deck or up into the next. Both of those would be accessed off of that street level, which would contain 198 spaces in that 2 stories. So most of your residential is going to be, and your commercial is going to be wrapped around that parking facility. This concept plan and previous versions went to the Planning Commission in both October and December of last year. Overall, the Planning Commission expressed support for the redevelopment project. Their largest concern was for parking and the impacts to parking in the downtown area. Things like the restaurant, the retail, the street side residential, multifamily residential, weren't necessarily identified as concerns, and neither were some of the other areas that the development team is seeking variations, such as the 5 stories where 4 would be required in this, or the 4 being the maximum in this district. As my staff report pointed out, the intent of tonight's meeting is to go through high-level planning commission, the comprehensive plan, the downtown plan, the zoning code, to just give you some preliminary status of where we're sitting and to gain some feedback from the council, just to help provide the developer as they start to move on to more formalized development plans. So the comp plan does identify this as an area for mixed-use development requiring at least 50% of the development to be residential. It doesn't indicate, though, the other 50% has to be commercial. It can also be 100% residential. The comp plan guides the property for 20 to 30 units per acre. They are proposing a little bit higher density at 43 units per acre. I'll talk a little bit just about density bonuses in a minute. The downtown plan does identify this as a redevelopment site. The plan really does acknowledge that code changes are needed for redevelopment to happen most efficiently in the downtown area. Those code changes haven't happened. We just adopted that plan in July, and there's been a number of other factors weighing in that. The plan does also talk about increasing capacity wherever we can, and using that plan to work with developers on the development and the redevelopment of the downtown area. The downtown plan calls for maintaining view sheds to the lake, especially from the Broadway Lake Avenue intersection, and connection to the Hardwood Creek Trail. Overall, the property is consistent with us wanting to see more residential, needing more residential in the downtown area. The redevelopment definitely cleans up some less desirable land uses or lower functioning land uses in the community. There are challenges with the parking, the view, and the pedestrian connections that we've been working through with the developer, and some of these things definitely will get fleshed out as the design further goes. So on the next slide here, I did include that Hardwood Creek Trail. So this is that development site. Here's the Hardwood Creek Trail. We did envision some connection along that, I think it's First Street corridor. The development plan does include some connectivity through here, more on the south end of the building, but that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to pull in more public infrastructure in this development and work it up that corridor. There are obviously some challenges through here because we do have vehicles coming in and out. We've got the townhome development with this being their only access. So how that pedestrian connection really works out in here, I think is something that can be fleshed out quite a bit. Additionally, when it comes to things like view shed, overall the design of the building as the development progresses can kind of help complement that view shed corridor some. So I think it might be too early to determine whether or not there's an impact at this time for certain. Parking, however, is generally that one thing that we'll discuss a little bit finer detail tonight. The zoning code, the development team has indicated that they would propose a planned unit development. So that's an overlay district above the downtown mixed-use zoning district. The property isn't inherently eligible because we do require our planned unit developments to have 7.5 acres in order to be a PUD. Now, that being said, the code also says, but if there are other significant on or off-site benefits or amenities, the city council can consider a PUD. The zoning code also indicates that density can be increased if there's not, if the development doesn't adversely impact public facilities or the neighborhood. So when we're looking at the PUD, a PUD, just as a reminder for council members, a PUD allows for the waiver of any code requirement that's essentially numerical based. You can't change the type of use. So if we said this can only be residential, they couldn't put commercial in. That's not the case. But any sort of heights, parking, density, those sorts of things are up for negotiation, and the council may waive those requirements as part of the development. The MU1 zoning district does not inherently allow for street side residential. However, the city has very specific zoning code standards for street side residential in this district. This is something that we've allowed for in the past. The code also indicates that 65% of the structure must be located along the property line. However, in working with the development team, we've definitely encouraged them to push the building back from those property lines, just given its location right at this prominent intersection. And then lastly, with the zoning code, just a base zoning district requirement, as I mentioned, there's a 45-foot, 5-story maximum, and our 4-story maximum. The developer would be proposing 5 stories. A big part of that is to accommodate that 2-level of parking that would be required for the development. Right now, we wouldn't know that maximum height requirement, but as the development gets fleshed out, we go through more design renditions, that would come to light what that would be. So again, as I noted, this has gone to the Planning Commission twice, and pretty consistently, the Planning Commission has been concerned about parking, and rightfully, I think this council has expressed that as well, just kind of off the cuff of downtown development. Currently, right now, when we look at, this is the development site, more or less, there are 133 spaces available to the public in the existing capacity. Now, that being said, we all know that in its current capacity, those 133 parking spaces, the drive lanes, all those sorts of things, are not to the city standards. We did look at the parkway design as part of the downtown plan and know that no matter how we would redesign that road, we would have less parking spaces than the 133. So initially, and I don't have that detail with me, but in that Lake Avenue Parkway, we looked at Ingold parking. We looked at the possibility for parallel parking, all of those just reduce the amount of parking in that area. So in my staff report, I had a few different tables, and I would like you just to focus on this one. And this one isn't updated from the one that you'd find on page 3 in the staff report. So this is just what the parking plan for the entire development site. Again, we're really looking at all of the public and private infrastructure that's being shown in the development plan. So there'd be 198 spaces in the ramp. There'd be 28 in a private parking lot on the south of the building, and 79 in the parkway as it's currently proposed with the head-in parking. That'd be 305 parking spaces. The total parking demand for the residential development would be somewhere between 200 and 255. And I indicate somewhere between because this is the current code requirement, 2.3 parking spaces for every one residential unit, but the developer is proposing 1.8 parking spaces for every residential unit. So in this scenario, when we're looking at the total parking provided and the demand, there's actually a surplus of somewhere between 50 and 105. The staff report talked about a deficit, and the staff report talked about a deficit because it was carrying in the parking requirement for the existing commercial building or the office building in this location. The city does not require commercial or non-residential users to provide any parking in the downtown area when you're east of Centennial Street. So the residential development is the only one that's required by code to provide parking. So the reason that this changed from a deficit to a surplus is we took out that demand for that office building, if that makes sense. See some heads nodding, but I'm happy to answer those questions. So while this is less, that surplus is less than the existing 133, we know that that 133 space count that we have today would be significantly reduced with that parkway design anyways. So there's no formal findings from staff. Some of the things that staff is encouraging the council to talk about today are, in general, a PUD, those benefits amenities to the public, and maybe those are answers the council doesn't have now, but might want to provide direction to the developer regarding what kinds of benefits and amenities on or off-site the city would want them to explore. Definitely the council should comment on the 5-story design because that is a very hard number, the 4 versus 5. The developer, as I noted, is proposing 1.8 parking spaces per unit. What the council thinks in terms of just a reduced parking number in the downtown core. We have discussed the development team at the time of application submittal potentially submitting some parking analysis of their existing infrastructure downtown to look to see how, because that is comparably parked at 1.8 spaces per unit. And then, some things just in terms of design aesthetics, especially when we look at the redesign of that area back there and how the city might want to achieve some of the amenities that they saw in that parkway design back there. So I know that Dan Ebert with Gong Companies and John Harris, John is joining us virtually tonight, so you'll hear him, the voice through the speaker system, are here to talk about this if you have questions for them. Otherwise, I'm available for questions if you have any for me.
Excellent. And Dan, do you have a planned presentation for council tonight, or are you here for Q&A? I'm
Yeah.
happy to give you the floor for whatever you'd like.
Thanks for everyone for coming tonight. Appreciate the time. Really pretty much open forum. I think Abby did a really good job at the narrative. We submitted our own narrative too. That was in the packet. But I think we really want to hear from council tonight. And so, John, are you here? John Harris?
I am here.
Awesome.
He's the voice
Okay.
of God. Nice.
So you're right.
Works.
So John is the architect on the project and the developer on the project. So we'd like to just get your thoughts on what you, after what you've heard from Abby and what you've seen in the packet.
Excellent. Abby, you had some very specific, I want to make sure, you had some very specific discussion points for council tonight. One was the question of a PUD. Second was some feedback related to number of stories. Third is related to overall feedback related to parking. Fourth was overall design aesthetics. I just want to make sure I've got our homework assignment listed.
Yep, those
Um,
are really kind of, I think, the largest talking points for this council. I think if there's anything else that any of the council members see as a cause for concern,
Of course.
or certainly something that we should be exploring at greater length and detail with the applicant, those I think should be brought up as well.
Of course. Maybe if we could we just start with just some basic just basic Q&A? I know, council, as you've reviewed the packet materials and as you've heard Abby's presentation and maybe also reviewed planning commission meeting notes, you may have some questions. So can we just maybe start with just some overall, like, questions on the project, just to kind of get the question list out there? And then maybe we can circle back then to some of the more discussion and just do a guided discussion on the specific points that Abby has, and then we could just kind of open it up. But maybe kind of getting our specific questions answered first would be maybe the way to make sure we start the conversation all in the same place. Does anyone have any questions on your list that you'd like to maybe throw out?
I guess I can start. Dan, so when Lighthouse Loft was done, there was some desire for a little more retail than what ended up there. Well, actually, there was no retail, but then there was some retail, so that was an ask that that council and EDA had at the time. Is this, you feel, the max amount of retail that, I know you took a little bit away to figure out the parking or bring in more parking, but is that, how did you land on that and the restaurant size versus the residential side?
Great
Yeah.
question.
That's a great question. So for retail, it's a lot about accessibility and being able to get to the storefronts. And so we felt that the west side of the project, you know, if that's retail, trying to create an area and parking field that people would actually, you know, that fit a parking requirement in front was very challenging. And then if you want to make someone walk from the east side parking field all the way around, it's just kind of barriers there. And so we felt like we landed at the 2,500 square feet south. It does two purposes. One is it wraps around the parking garage, so you won't see the parking garage on the south side there. And then the other just creates parking. So it's reasonable parking for people to come and use the retail and support the retail there. And then also, when we were talking with Abby and the staff, I think it's important to note that the 28 stalls to the south of the retail, and I think on the graph it shows, or the worksheet, it shows that that's independent of the public. And right now it's private property, but we would have to work with the city to make it all public, because there's no reason that that we would say no parking but for retail use, because that would just, you can't police it, and that wouldn't be reasonable or practical, because that's not how the whole downtown works. And so we would have that part of the overall municipal. So 79 plus the 28, what's that, the 104 or whatever, 105. And so that's kind of, I think that kind of works itself out there. And then to the north would just be kind of a marquee restaurant. And then, so just so everyone kind of understands here, is that it's not the intent of, because we are pushing the overall real estate to the north, to where it's at now, the actual, the 5 stories of the apartment wouldn't come up and be right over the restaurant, so there'd be a sheer wall. So it's not, there'd be a stepping back approach to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and then the other thing too, for the residential in front, it's gonna feel like it'll be independent of the actual other 3 stories of residential, because it's gonna stick out a little bit. And again, that's to kind of draw the eyes down and not up. So we thought that was a feature worth exploring.
Dan, can I make sure I heard you right? Did you say the restaurant is 2 stories in height, or what's that height, planned height for the restaurant?
So I think the idea here is to have a rooftop patio, so that would be above the actual restaurant.
Okay.
So that would be the second floor, yeah.
On second floor, and obviously that's the top, and then is the thought, Abby, do you mind putting the picture back? Yeah, I know. Just wanted to have a common view. And then to the south of the restaurant, is that when you would have step up to then be 5 stories?
Yeah, so then it's 4 and 4, so if you look up, maybe you want to just, the blue portion represents 4,000 main, 4,000 the second floor, and then the northeast corner is the patio,
Understood,
would be considered on the second floor.
understood. And then
Yeah.
on the south side of the project, is that intended to be just 2 stories also? Or is that 5 stories all the way to the south?
Taller ceilings above the retail, that would encompass 2, we're hoping is more of a story and a half.
Okay.
Because we're hoping to go down 5 feet if we can for the first ground of structured parking, and then, and John, if you have any comments here, you can just pipe in, so, is that accurate?
Yes, I should mention too that the reason that we're going 5 stories is that we don't want to bank on going underground at all. Typically, in the developments that we do, we'd be underground with at least 1 level of parking. But because of the water table here, we thought it would be disingenuous to say we're going down a level when we're not certain. So we're taking the approach that it's going to be 5 stories at this point.
And do you know for sure that you're not able to go down, or is that to be determined as you go further into your project plan?
Well, just, I think our experience in town, even Lighthouse Lofts, we lifted it up, and the elevator pit, it has had issues since day one, actually. It's just the static pressure of it's really hard. So though we would hope and cross our fingers and toes, I don't know that's gonna work out. Yep.
And I don't mean to monopolize the question list here. Jump in with other kind of surface level questions that others may have about the project presentation.
And how many stories is the Lighthouse Lofts now? What, is that,
It's 5.
that's 5?
Yep, and then so there's an underground parking that's not included within that story. 63 stalls there. And that parking ratio is 1.8 per unit.
Well, the reason I asked that question, I just wanted to make a comparison here for fire code and that kind of thing, and we've already been there, so
Yeah.
should be okay.
One of the comments around, one of the points, Abby, that you make is around, PUD qualification and how this project qualifies for a PUD. Abby, you mentioned a PUD has a requirement for 7 acres. What is the site size here that we're talking about? I'm just trying to get a
Yeah, it all
feeling.
depends. If you included the land area that is public land, which is still up for discussion, so you excluded that existing office building, I want to say it's only about 2.6 acres. It really isn't that sizable.
Okay.
2.6, 2.8. I don't remember exactly. I'd have to go back through my notes.
And would it be customary, this maybe just might be completely out of bounds, would it be customary to include an existing parcel like the Plaza building in a PUD, or is that just a no-go, like it's already done project and PUD would exclude the Plaza building?
There isn't necessarily, and I can't remember, Dan might know better, something makes me think it might have been developed as a PUD itself. Generally, PUDs do have 2 buildings, pulling it in or not. I don't think it necessarily hinders the development. You're not gaining any sort of land area for that, but it might just be able to help make a more cohesive design if you pulled it all in together. It definitely sits with this development in a way that nothing else really around there does.
So with that thought in mind, around PUD, I'm just interested in hearing from, kind of in your own words, what are your thoughts around public amenity? What would you list as kind of banners for public amenity? I have thoughts of what might be in for public, but I'd want to hear, like, what would you promote to the community as kind of the public benefit?
Sure. So you're going to, for one thing, right now, I think if you talk to Ryan Goodman and you discuss stormwater treatment, there's a pipe that goes into the lake probably from here. And so as far as like flow control on rainwater, it's just not existent. And so that's one aspect. There would be treated stormwater to increase water quality. I mean, secondly, you're getting rid of a blighted block there. I mean, that's creditworthy too. And I mean, we are parking our project residential exclusively in the project footprint at 1.8 stalls per unit. And so I think that does create some more dynamics for, there's a lot of talk about public parking, and do we have enough? Don't we have enough? I've worked downtown for 17 years. I'm there every day. I see it. I feel it. I have my thoughts, and I know other people have their thoughts as well, and their perceptions. Let's just take a step back, and if this block were to be like redeveloped as a healthcare facility, they would have to put a parking garage on that site and go up in order to park all the cars necessary for their clients. There wouldn't be enough parking, regardless if it's required or not required. So there's demand, nighttime and daytime, and so they can kind of reciprocate and they can work off each other, which is happening now. So I believe that by a project like this, you're creating more flexibility in municipal parking. So I think that's an advantage, and I think that's an amenity. Anything else, John, that I missed?
Yes, we've also included, I'm not sure if Abby mentioned it briefly, a trail that goes down to the lake.
Question, yeah.
That does connect in with the general area that was envisioned in the downtown plan and the redevelopment of this area. In addition, we're also reducing impervious surface, providing a small pocket park area that you can see there in the green triangles. It's not developed in terms of, what would be there, but we consider those to be public amenities that do go above and beyond what is required.
And then also just mention too, just on the west side, so from south to north or whatever, that's going to be I think Bruce Chamberlain had an 8-foot sidewalk or something there. That's going to be a substantial sidewalk for people to, I suppose, bike and do whatever they need to do, but nice and wide and inviting. So as they go around to the north of the property.
I would also include the green space on the west side of the building as, it is added green space.
Yep.
It is, if that streetscape for those walk-ups is done well, that is
Right.
certainly some amenity. I don't know if we count this as a public amenity, but one of my observations on Lighthouse Lofts is it has a beautiful rooftop place, like one of the best spaces in the city, but it's not open to the public. You mentioned a rooftop patio to the restaurant. Is there going to be another rooftop patio for residents or?
Yeah, yep.
Yes, and so there's two patio spaces?
Yeah, so one would be for a restaurant, so the public, the other one will be exclusive to the residents. It's very important to separate the residents from the
Understood.
commercial from the
Understood.
residents, yeah.
But I don't know if technically that meets the qualifications of a public amenity, but it is an accessible space that's going to have beautiful lake that I just kind of put into that. I give some credit of.
Yeah, and I
Different than maybe the Lighthouse Lofts, which also is a beautiful space. It's just not accessible to the
Right.
public.
so that's the idea is to have a stunning view to the lake from the rooftop patio.
Excellent. Other specific questions that we should kind of have of the project overall that maybe we want to vet through?
Dan, if you maybe talk a little bit about the use of the restaurant and maybe how that's going to be different than the previous, what Vanelli's was with more event and the requirements of parking there versus a more traditional restaurant, which I think is what's being contemplated here.
Yeah, it's just not as, we're not considered, call it a banquet hall or something, just a smaller. So right now, it's kind of interesting. I talked to the current user for the restaurant, and right now, there's 270 seats possible in Vanelli's, 24,000 square feet. And if you use the equation for just your city required equation, that's like 108 seats just by itself, 108. And so this would require a lot less seats. It's 8,000 square feet, 8 to 10,000 square feet. So it's smaller. It's not going to be, it's going to be small events, banqueting. It's not going to be large wedding event venue. So it's going to
Rich,
cut down the square
Less
feet.
and less parking if you don't have 200 people showing up at an event or a wedding.
Yeah.
That overflow is even going to be less going into the municipal lot, which I think would be.
Absolutely, yeah, no,
positive.
significantly less. It's just not the game to have a big, there's really 3 facilities within Vanelli's. You have the bar restaurant, and then you have a smaller little event center, and then you have the bigger one up top, and then downstairs it's full bar downstairs. So, I mean, you can legitimately serve a lot of people out there, so.
There's also, I also wanted to mention that we're planning on a large street level deck on the corner there toward the lake that is going to have, every seat on that patio is going to have a view of the lake as well.
Fabulous. Should we maybe start to address, maybe start kind of going through by topic, Abby's kind of discussion points that she had suggested, and then we can kind of open it up to just broader all other topics afterwards. And I know parking is the elephant in the room. I just personally have this feeling that while it's important, if we design every project just based on parking, we're going to have some pretty boring projects. And so could we talk about parking at the end, just to get some other thoughts first, and come back so that parking meets the needs of the project rather than we're not doing a project around parking. So if we could, maybe, let's just start with the discussion around a PUD, and then we'll move into a discussion around just the overall stories, feedback on stories. We'll then talk about just some overall design aesthetics, and let's tackle parking at the end, if that's okay. Thoughts on, open feedback, thoughts on the overall PUD. Abby, could you again, you went through really fast kind of the requirements for a PUD. Can
Sure.
you maybe just highlight some of the gaps that might need to be met, or?
Sure, so it's interesting, so again, a PUD, you have your base zoning district of the downtown mixed use, and then the PUD is an overlay district, so it's a special zoning district that the city may use. You're not obligated in any way. The code says landowner has to have a minimum of 7.5 acres, but the code also then says, unless there's some other significant public benefit amenity on or off-site to the city. It's kind of vague. There's some hard things in there, but then the code also says, unless there's some other compelling reason to grant this. Pulling in, answering the mayor's question earlier, pulling in the plaza building doesn't necessarily conflict in any way with the development of a PUD. It gives it some more land area. I think there will be that discussion going down the road of what land area is in the PUD and ownership, but that isn't necessarily something that isn't inherently going to conflict with a PUD. PUDs allow for any change in any numerical value. So instead of a variance to a number of stories or the foot height, we just waive that requirement. But again, yep.
And that would that include, so when you say it allows us to waive in one action anything that has a numerical value?
Yep.
So does that include parking requirements?
Yep.
Could be addressed separately in a PUD?
Parking and density.
Density, also the number of stories? Is
Number
that
of stories.
also come through the
Yep.
PUD? Okay.
Yep.
Is there anything,
Setbacks.
general, like building project type items that wouldn't come through that PUD, that even if it were in a PUD, it needs, because it kind of feels like the PUD option is a way to really do an à la carte plan or an à la carte project, right? That kind of allows for, is there any major exceptions we should be thinking about at this point, I guess is maybe my question.
I mean, so in its simplest terms, the PUD is the tool to break the rules, right? And so if we're going to break the rules and not use that traditional variance process,
Right.
there needs to be some sort of compelling reason. It needs to be what we want to see in that space. What's best, the public benefit for that. They're really it's really a tool designed to design for the site.
And did we do a PUD with Lighthouse Lofts?
I believe so,
Yeah,
Okay.
so PUD was done, the Plaza Building, I'll just check Park Place to see if that was done. Lighthouse Lofts was, and then the Cherrywood Point also had a PUD. So most of the time, and it's very common, we go to other municipalities, a PUD is a good avenue to encompass your mixed use, your height, your parking ratios, things like that.
At this point, maybe council, any red flags, gut check, things that concerns you might have, things you would want to see in a PUD type development? If you're a hard no on a PUD right now would be a great time to say that. But we also haven't given you enough information to know that. So just kind of what's on your mind is, I guess, I'd open it up. Any thoughts?
I guess my thoughts are, I, as of right now, I'm not a hard no to the PUD. One aspect that I like about this, looking at it just broadly speaking, is the greenery. Because down there right now, it's all pavement, concrete, just very dark and gloomy. So I really like the green space incorporated into this.
Other thoughts on PUD?
Just, I'm not sure this is tied to a PUD, but just curious, aesthetically, how will this tie into the existing building where you're officed at? Just the close proximity, what will that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we would like to do as much brick as we can in masonry on the project. I think that'd be great to do, to complement the downtown, to complement the Plaza Building, and then also Park Place as well. I think we'd want to do that as much as we can. So, yeah, we're anxious to get into the design phase, to show you guys something, so, yeah.
Other thoughts specific to a PUD?
As far as the
ahead.
stories, sorry, as far as the size of the stories, I think that, especially if it's stepped back a bit, that's a little bit, 5 stories, 4 stories. I don't know if driving by, you're gonna notice it that much, and again, if it is stepped back. So I think that if that's what it needs to be to figure out is how far down you can go and it still make it all work, I'm not opposed to 5 stories.
I have similar feedback. It's good to hear that it's not just a 5-story rectangle that's being dropped into downtown, that it will have some diversity of height. And so having it be bookended with smaller stories, I think helps that visual. It also helps, we talk about the view shed to the lake, but I'm always a little bit challenged there because I think we already have some limitations of view shed. And so, but having it be 2 stories on that north end, I think just helps. And I think related to the PUD, I'm open to a PUD. I think it's going to be in the articulation of what's the public benefit. I was happy to hear, the green space planning, that there is some planned trail connectivity specifically for the project. One of the things that could help that even further is if you overlay the current plan with what was in the downtown plan, doing something with this parking alley that makes it more green space, more parkway, and less parking lot. I think whatever can be done design-wise, I think helps that a fair amount. We heard a lot of feedback in the downtown plan that right now walking downtown feels like a stroll through lots of parking lots. And I'm a little worried that we've continued this with the current plan, and this is going to immediately conflict with our feedback on parking, so I appreciate your challenge. But whatever we can do to make that feel a little bit less like I'm talking about the portion that's on the east side of the building, to not make that feel like the back door, and to feel like we want this, circular walking path around downtown, and this naturally is going to be that southern turnaround point, and whatever we can do both to help access to the park further on the east, to the east of the Plaza Building, but then also that space between the Plaza Building and the new building. I think design-wise, there's just a lot of benefit to that. Again, I appreciate you've designed this because of the parking requirements, but I think that also helps to just make the mark of more public benefit, closer to a PUD, than what you might otherwise plan in a project.
I think you can accomplish some really good things on the east side there that's called the backside. with some really nice planting hardscapes and really to soften it. And then we did put that triangular piece and really those connection points and sidewalks that aren't there today.
Yep.
And then, and the other challenge is MinDOT. MinDOT doesn't want this to be a one-way, doesn't want this to be, it needs to be through. So you can get back onto 61 at the north and the south. We found that out really early on, probably about a year ago. So unless they've changed their mind, which I don't think they do, but they're gonna need full circulation just because of the amount of density we put in here. So there's some element we just have to leave, you know, and in the interim, you can put more speed bumps back there. That's for one thing, if you want to really do that. Because people, they tried to beat the roundabout. Abby's heard me say this a couple
They
times.
do try to beat the roundabout.
And so you obviously there, so you know.
Yeah.
So you had to kind of creep out. So I think this is gonna feel more, it's gonna bring it down, I think. So that's, those are noteworthy. We've tried to incorporate these connections, more than one, from, you know, right, because I mean, really, and about the, and about the visibility to the lake, I think the city took the shoreline and made that the people's. So like, that's the point, is that you need to park downtown and you go see the lake and be by the lake. And so you have your buildings behind you and then in front of you have the lake. So I think that was great to do, because you always have that preserved. So.
I think one of the things too, we could possibly look at for making it feel parkway-like would be lighting. Just what are the lighting elements that would tie in with other areas of the
I would
city?
agree. And also just the back of the design of the building itself, right now that you feel like you're at the back door. And so the design feature of the back side of that building can just really help make it feel like you're not in an alley.
Yeah, I mean, there's some creative art you can do, and we can get some illustrations as how you can soften the feel of the parking garage too. Yeah.
Other thoughts?
Yeah,
Just a couple of things.
just a couple.
Things I'd like to say about
Okay.
that parkway, design. One is that the east-facing facade of the building, we don't consider the back of the building.
Good.
We consider that the front of the building. And so, even though the, plan that was submitted is pretty stark, I mean, it's pretty, you know, it's just basic in terms of not showing a lot of plantings, it's not showing lighting or, different kind of paving. But if you take the north-south pedestrian circulation into consideration, imagine those being planted with trees all along those walks. There's a 7-foot planting bed along the building, which is significant as well. And then that triangular green space. So I think, sure, we could always add islands and stuff like that, but, you know, I don't think that's really gonna appreciably make the difference. I think it's the elements along the pedestrian circulation and the interesting facade on the east is gonna be what really helps us. The other thing I wanna mention too, you're talking about variations in height and the, you know, not having just a rectangular slab. You know, we totally concur. We were just showing the parking level here, but if you look at the parking level, it's a very wide base. You know, in most residential multifamily designs, you've got a double-loaded row of parking, and above that you have 68, 66 foot wide building. The width of the base allows us to jog the building east and west as well. So that we'll consider, well, where's the office building? We don't really want our building right up against that. We want to jog that back. Or where are the walk-up units? And how is the main building going to relate to that? So I think there's a lot of opportunities for interest in the architecture as we move forward.
Understood. I'm happy to hear personally that you would consider the east to be the front side of the building, because I think that, just hearing that alleviates, if that is going to be designed as front side of residential, a residential property, multifamily property, that kind of helps paint the picture a little bit. Any other comments specific to PUD, and we can always circle back as well? Should we move?
Well, the only comments I had about the total design is I like the idea of the restaurant, the way that's set up, and I think needs to be there on the other end, on the south end. Just my opinion, that doesn't seem like it lends itself to retail, any kind of retail in the whole thing there, because of, the access, and it's not next to other retail, so that's just my,
Yeah, well, it's a stretch, sure. But it's our best shot at it, and we want to bring shops downtown too, really do. And it does help, break it up and back to keep the eyes down. So you have the retail, and then you have the residential on the other side, and so it keeps it interesting, I think. Yeah, I mean, if someone were to say, listen, we want more parking, this is how you get more parking, inevitably is to take the retail out, because that's not gonna there's no parking if you don't have retail, it's not gonna take parking, so that would be a trade-off we could talk about if we didn't need more parking.
it's something to think about, I think.
Sure.
I was in the retail business for years, and
One of the things too about that retail, Dan alluded to it, it hides the parking ramp. It helps to hide the parking ramp, so at the entrance, from this, pedestrian circulation element on the south side, you're gonna be going by retail, and there's gonna be, we envision that, hopefully as something like a coffee shop or something like that. As people head down to the lake, potentially, there's a place to stop there, and you're not walking by a two-story parking ramp wall. And the walk-ups do the same thing on the Broadway side, or on the 61 side.
And it may be a medical, maybe office, maybe it's split, maybe, who knows? I mean, I think it's, when you say retail space, it could be just about anything. Foresight can use more just nice, newer office, retail type space, medical space. Yep.
We've had some feedback intermixed here related to the actual stories and the prospect of, so varied heights, overall height, maximum of 5 stories. Other feedback points related to, in particular, just the number of stories? I know that's an important design element, so good to get that feedback out there.
Yeah, I mean, no concerns. I mean, I think it's, very much like Lighthouse Lofts. I mean, we've done it before. Whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, it's not going to change the pedestrian's view of the lake, And so, I like, especially when you're stair stacking like that, I mean, I think it could really, really look good.
I agree. And as Blake mentioned earlier, if it's 4 or 5, I don't think people would really notice.
yeah, that'd be my opinion too.
Is
The view from the lake's already gone there anyway, so.
Is the portion that are the townhome units, is that 5 stories starting, right? Or does the 5-story component start after I keep hitting my mic. Is that a staggered height on the,
Yeah.
yes,
So like right now, Lighthouse Lofts, there's walkouts, they're not staggered.
right,
It's just,
straight up.
it's a sheer wall. This would be bumped out. And like through the design process, they'll show us some illustrations. We've done it before, Shakopee. We have 2-story. So I'm trying to think, John, are these 2-story? No, there's only 6 of them. They're single-story, right? John? For the residential, just 6 of them? 3, 1, 2, 3.
I think
Yeah.
they are, because they're only about 600 square feet apiece.
Yeah, so we had talked about doing 12 of those, do them stacked and having a little bit more of the townhome feel. But the second level of the structured parking, just your drive lanes is constricted, so, okay. So yeah, that would just cause just a little bit more uniqueness, you know, and just take your eyes back down and not go up, so.
I think that's helpful. I do,
Okay. To answer the question about, the wall of the five-story building does not come up above the townhomes. The 3 stories of the larger residential building is pushed back from the street. And so as you're coming in to downtown from the south, you're not really gonna feel like it's all big one wall. It's gonna really have a feeling, a more of a pedestrian-oriented feeling with a substantial boulevard of trees and lighting and paving. And the building will be pushed back to the east. So, so the point is not to make it a foreboding structure as you're coming into town.
understand. Any other feedback specific to stories? All right, should we talk about overall, any other comments specific on design aesthetics? We've gone into a couple of feedback points. Any other thoughts? Actually, before we transition, I do need to say, related to stories, as we get deeper into the project and as we get deeper into public comment period, I do expect that is going to be a point of just public comment. We already hear a fair amount of public comment around height of buildings downtown. I just think it's important to acknowledge that there is some public sensitivity to it, but I also think that, you know, if this project is going to proceed and if we're going to support it, that's where we really need to be able to articulate what the public benefits are and why, you know, why we've allowed that and why we've decided at this space. So all of these, you know, design criteria we've talked about are important to that. The public amenities are important to that. But I do think that as this progresses, we should just be eyes wide open that there is some sentiment and some community concern to height in our downtown district. So I think it's important to just note.
Okay.
Let's talk about other design aesthetics, other questions related specifically to design. I'm looking at my notes to see others that we haven't maybe already talked about.
On the design, you know, once we see that, I guess, feedback, Leif mentioned it a bit, that, you know, not that Lighthouse Lofts doesn't look good, I think that's a great-looking building, but to match it more with what you've done in, you know, the previous building right on the lake there with more stone and brick, I think to tie those two and just the, kind of that timeless look that gives a downtown, I think would really be important and help sell the thing to the public, to everyone else.
Okay.
One aesthetic item that I note, and I'm interested in seeing more on as your plans evolve, is the actual aesthetics of the walk-ups. I know we have a walk-up situation on Second Avenue, and it's, in my opinion, it's functional but less than ideal in that you really are at somebody's living room as you're walking by on the sidewalk. Whatever we can do around screening and space of green space, that it looks more like a front door rather than a window into a living room. And it feels, I'd like that it's a townhome type unit rather than an apartment unit. I think just because of its location, we have traffic stacked many days, many afternoons, right in front of that, waiting for the roundabout. And so whatever we can do to make that be a good buffer for both residents and the public, aesthetically, I think is going to be important, and really kind of a differentiator of people being excited about kind of the overall design of the project.
Yeah, so what I envision would be is a step up and then almost like a balcony or a front stoop that would be kind of probably metal that you step up into, and then you have the front door. So maybe John has a different idea, but it would be definitely, the separation would be steps and a gate or something. But someone would have a nice outside space for chairs, things like that. What are you thinking, John? Do you think of something else?
In general, we're looking at, like I said before, it's like kind of like a green alley coming up through there. You know, you've got trees on the boulevard side, you've got trees on the townhouse side, and we'd probably make those out of brick just because they're only 2 stories, and it just gives a really solid feeling and a feeling kind of an old style row house that typically would be brick. So, and we would like to have, there's a possibility that we'd have the top level, the second floor maybe slightly overhang the first floor so we can create a porch type element there. But all that remains to be seen.
Understood.
Yeah.
Other feedbacks on aesthetics that maybe we haven't already covered? Thoughts? Abby, are we hitting on
You are, this
Primary
is plenty
points,
of, I think,
okay.
direction.
good level of detail at this point?
Yep, it's great. I think a lot of this ends up getting fleshed out in this, their next, when they make formal application submittals and want to make sure that they're
Right.
coming at it with a fresh, good, solid standing and what the council would like to see.
Well, let's transition to the elephant in the room of parking.
Sure.
This is not a fun topic. I'm just interested in council's perspective on parking and just open thoughts on parking design. As you look at this plan, initial feedback. Let's just open it up. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that Forest Lake's parking requirement is higher. I don't know if I'll say significantly higher, but certainly higher than a lot of municipalities. We've had, I think, great success with Lighthouse Lofts at 1.8. I've gone to Mallard's multiple times, I've worked out over there, I've never had a problem finding a parking spot. I can't imagine that would change. I suspect that, when I go to this restaurant, I'll be able to find a parking spot.
That was gonna be my comment as well. I've gone to Mallard's too, and knowing that theirs is 1.8, makes me feel comfortable going ahead and okaying this with 1.8.
Other
So
points of
is that,
feedback?
that's my understanding as well, that is, we're a little bit more stringent on our parking requirements than most downtowns similar size, or is that not the case? Is 2.3 typical in a lot of?
2.3 is, I can't say typical, but it's common.
Okay.
I think many jurisdictions are reevaluating that, especially as there's things like just people walk more, bike more, in areas where there's mass transit. The communities that are a little more suburban and are a little more car dependent are a little less risk adverse and kind of stick to that 2 or greater. So it's 2 per unit and then 1 or 0.3 for every guest. So what a lot of communities are even willing to say, okay, well, 2 per unit still makes sense. Let the guest parking go out into the public arena. The city has, as Dan has indicated, the 1.8 has been something that's been approved downtown. I don't know when it comes to the other residential developments, like what was formerly known as Cherrywood Point, what their numbers were. I would have to do further analysis. We certainly, Councilor Roberts could find out what other, local municipalities are doing or comparably sized municipalities are doing.
I think maybe where I remember hearing that now that I'm thinking about it is Bruce Chamberlain mentioning that in the plan, that that is the trend to go a little bit more, just be more liberal on the parking, and he mentioned that a couple times through the study.
I know that's been it's important, and I know it's in particular been a sensitivity on other multifamily projects in Forest Lake where where there just isn't an option for off-site parking. So I think about, what's the project over by St. Peter's, Arbor Ridge? I'm gonna get it.
Yeah, you're right.
Is it Arbor Ridge? In that space, if that site isn't adequate for parking, the adjacent parking is not good. I mean, we're talking dangerous and pretty much non-existent. So there isn't an overflow option. And I think when, council, and I can, speak for myself, or when I, voted for Lighthouse Lofts, that is not the situation in a downtown district. And you do have some option for overflow. I think we just need to have eyes wide open of what is that pressure and what are we doing for overflow. And so we just know what that looks like, and because it will happen, and there will be times when it is, the 4th of July or Tuesday in Arts in the Park, and there is surge parking downtown, and we will hear feedback. And I just think we need to know, what does that look like? And are we comfortable that there's enough margin or not? And so one of my questions would be, it'd be good to know what is our municipal what's the capacity in the municipal lot? And again, not on a Tuesday night, not in 4th of July, but just average daytime and evening capacity of that municipal lot. Because I just think that is naturally the overflow place, and I think we should just know, what does that look like? Also, I know there's daytime parking for the current plaza building, and so what does that impact mean for the current plaza building? I know, technically it's commercial space and there's not a requirement, but there is a, there's a livability requirement of, we do need parking to be applied, and where is that parking going under this project, and is that the municipal lot? And just, what does that volume look like? It'd just be good to know that early on, just so we have a comfort level of what the impact is for overflow, because overflow will happen. Again, just.
If I might, Mayor Bain, the staff report tried to summarize what was included in the downtown plan. And so the first table that's found on page 4 right now says that just based on the existing conditions, and it calls for the development site of 191 spaces, we could look at what is actually there today, that there is a shortfall, that we are at a deficit in terms of the current
Today.
demand.
Here's my challenge on that. I'm down there every day and I just don't feel that. Like,
I agree with you. I think parking there's a perception, right? I mean, if people can't park directly or within a very short, and I'm not talking,
no, it's like 20
100
feet. If
feet,
I
but
can't park in 20 feet, somebody's upset. And I just think that's part of the mind shift of having an amenity, and it's the trade-off, is that you've got the amenity that's so great and has the public benefit that people will be willing to walk from I hear complaints of just people not wanting to walk from the north side of the municipal lot to the south side, and gosh, we're not gonna get very far on any projects if that's the requirement, and so it is a mind shift, but I think it's unfair to ask that of developers of, you've gotta provide this space literally outside of everybody's door, just trying to find the balance, because as much as I might say it shouldn't be a public perception, it is also reality, so.
and this
We
is
will
where I
hear
would
that
say, if you
feedback.
just take a look at this development proposal, and I haven't done the analysis of all the commercial that's proposed, including the plaza building. They are, the largest development here is the 111 residential units, and they are almost parking all of that, at 1.8 in the facilities. So if you look at just the impact to the public system, they're minimizing that with this development. But you hit the nail right on the head. This really comes down to a trade-off of public, desires. It's going to be parking versus aesthetics, or it's going to, that's just how this one's going to have to, I think, play out. I can do whatever analysis you want, but in the end, we're going to find that there'll be a shortfall.
So in looking at this chart you included on page 4, am I reading this correct, that in looking at the first chart where it says existing development demand, and it refers to 56 First Street, that we're saying that building right now requires 94 parking spots?
That is, according to the downtown plan. So that was analysis that Bruce Chamberlain did.
There's people that work in that building, does that feel like that's the need?
Well, that's the market demand, so that's not the requirement, that's the market demand. So every building that outside of downtown, there's ratios for office, right? So every 1,000 square feet, they say you need 4 parking stalls, right, whatever. So that's how you kind of get to that 94 number, in essence, actually 5 stalls. But, there's not 100 people that are in that building, some of it's retail, some, there's just different, so it's use-based a lot too. And I'll just make a mention too about the parking ratios. The parking ratios of 2.23 was based on 2 and 3 bedroom, right? And now these are 1 and 2 bedroom. And so, though the code doesn't look at types of units, size of units. It just is a blanket 2.23. Because that's just how people used to develop back then. Now it's just different. It's different, and we're not saying that we're out of the box of most developers at all, really. We're in mainstream. We do what works, what people want, and so if people want to have affordability, then that sometimes size has to suffer a little bit for there. But people have figured it out. They want something new, and with amenities, then having the 2-foot wide greater living room, right? Because they have a flat screen TV, and there's no tube TVs these days. I'm just saying, like, it's weird. The code hasn't really caught up to what's happening today, and so John's probably biting his tongue right now because he's like, concur. You know, other projects, we are less than 1 per unit in St. Paul downtown. We don't want that. That's a studio-based project. Shakopee probably was most competitive. That's downtown. That's 1.6 per unit. That's 170 units on 1.86 acres. That's tight, really tight, but it works. And then on and on and on and on and on. I mean, again, we're not the only people that do this and do urban redevelopment and see these things and go on these trends because we have banks and the story goes on, right? We have our, and we work at the plaza. Well, you know, how fun would that be? Gee, Patrick, guess we missed it on this one, huh? And so I think 1.8 is comfortable for us. And we probably could squeeze it to 1.6. I mean, we probably could, but we're like, you know, we want to give a little bit more and be a little more cautious on this than to say, gosh, if we just had 10 or 15, 20 more stalls, it would be perfect. And so we feel like 1.8, we are kind of on that end. We're going to be doing a project in Osceola, Wisconsin, the old hospital site there. That's 1.7, so,
In Osceola.
yes.
So I hear that in St. Paul, and I think, okay, there's regional transit, but it's interesting to hear that in Osceola.
There's more public parking. There's lots of public parking downtown. Like, there's streets and it's kind of out the beaten path a little bit, so there's,
More than here, though? Would you say there's more than here?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they've got a municipal lot of 40 stalls that never gets used.
Yeah.
And that, we know that and that's like a half a block away. So we know that if things really get whatever. But again, it's a lot on, you know, people will move out and just do a one bed plus and a den. So they work from home and it's just different today than it was when these codes were first implemented, maybe in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so that's why most people do PUDs. And so, because they do the analysis, they say these 50 projects that were just done here in the suburbs the last 10 years, here's what the average was. And so it's proven out through projects that have been developed, stabilized, seasoned for 4 or 5 years, like, for example, like Lighthouse has.
I just have this perspective on
Yeah.
parking that we're going to have this challenge on every great project that comes to downtown. Like, it's just going to be part of every great project. And so it kind of starts to become around priorities of, are we designing our great projects around parking, or are we designing for great projects that are going to create demand of people wanting to be there, and they will figure out the parking. And if that means walking a couple blocks, then that's what happens. I appreciate that it's important, and we are Minnesota, and there's snow and weather and all sorts of things that make parking less than desirable. But when we hear what people really want downtown, when you actually get to what they want, parking is pretty low on the list. It's important, but it's not, I'm gonna go downtown if there's great parking. That's not what's gonna draw people to downtown. What's gonna draw them is it's a great space. I can enjoy a nice evening, I can walk. And so I look at this and I think we've sacrificed too much for parking personally. Like, I think aesthetically, we're creating another project that is a walking path through a parking lot. And I would rather give up some parking and have a more beautiful project that's a little bit less like walking through a parking lot. But I don't know, that's my initial feedback.
Sure seems like that's the trend, there's no question about it. I mean, because we were even talking about smaller lots for
Agreed.
R1, you know?
Correct.
And so, I don't know, people they're not into big yards or and that kind of stuff, they're just looking for a living space in some cases. And so,
I think the other, as I mentioned before, not having a large event space and then a huge restaurant, that footprint is a third of the size basically, and, it's just gonna, even if it's as it stands now, the parking situation seems like it's gonna be much improved than it is now.
This is probably the most difficult part of the downtown.
I agree.
I also would like to just remind everybody, I know it's been said before, but daytime uses versus nighttime uses.
Yeah.
The office building is a daytime use, and theoretically, those spaces will be freed up in the evening. Now, the PUD, and Abby, I may be wrong, but allows you to deduct from your requirement 50% for a daytime use versus a nighttime use. So my point is that it's really better than it seems to be because of the daytime, nighttime use difference.
John does bring up a point, the zoning code. So if this was, let's just say it was out on Broadway, further out of the downtown where we do have commercial requirements and it's a mixed-use development, when we have daytime uses and nighttime uses, we can allow up to 50% credit for one, to be able to kind of double dip, essentially. This one parking space serves as that one daytime use and that nighttime use. So under that scenario, I can do quite a bit of that analysis to show that there's, whatever we need to kind of see here. Regardless of that, the downtown plan very much said, if we want to put in aesthetics, if we want the parkway design, no matter what ends up going in this space, we're going to have a reduction of parking in this area.
I do think it highlights the need for, at some point, district parking, and, that's part of where we've got that built into the plan for this exact reason. I think, as I've seen public feedback related to this project and other similar projects downtown, there's been some comment and chatter around parking. I just think that, I think we're doing well if we have made this project self-contained. And I think to ask this project to carry more of that municipal burden, I just don't think is reasonable. And again, which is why the downtown plan anticipates at some point a more district-wide, citywide downtown option beyond what we have today to the municipal lot. One thing I would be interested in is, we talk about daytime uses and nighttime uses, and in this post-COVID world where everyone's hybrid and people don't leave in the same patterns that they used to. What have you seen with Lighthouse Lofts around your daytime parking, nighttime parking? Is that building emptying out during the day, or are folks working from home, or what do we know about those trends? Because I think that would be very similar to what we might see at this building.
People are going back to work and back to the office, probably 3-4 days a week. I think that's gonna be sunsetting here, especially with the recession, things like that happening. No, there's plentiful parking, so no one really pays attention to that, honestly. I
That's actually a
really,
good answer, too.
really don't
Okay,
know.
that's good.
That whole back row that would be adjacent to the trail is essentially really never used.
That's good feedback.
So.
Good.
The other question I have is, we're really trying to do our best here to make that develop. It might seem a little mundane, but managing snow events in this particular scenario, it's going to be a challenge if, we're talking about 20 inches of snow and what else other stuff, but it seems like that would be an issue, or at least a challenge for hauling it away every time, or where would you stack it? That's the problem.
Well, it's a challenge now.
It certainly is.
And but it's life. We just live with it, honestly.
I know, but
you kind of live with the.
No, I understand it, but what's
yeah.
the answer?
Well, the answer is might not be a great answer. The answer is you just kind of roll with it. And there's plenty of times where the city doesn't remove. The snow piles are there for a long time. They don't come through with the plows. You're walking through 3-4 inches of snow, but it's life. Whatever, you just deal with it. It's like these guys are trying as hard as they can to get this. It's hard. I don't know, maybe there's some green space. You probably can load some snow where there's not now. you know, I don't know what that triangle would be, if that would be some sort of a marquee little spot or just a green space, but maybe there's some, you know, spots for snow there. Yeah, it's tough.
What do you guys
It's
do over at
not-
Lighthouse Loss for snow removal? I mean, do you ship it off, or is there room to pile it?
There's enough spaces where you can
Or
just
they-
pile it in the back.
Space in the back there. so-
Yeah, to the
On the west
west.
side.
Yeah, there's,
Yeah.
it's really no issue.
I think they, you know, they've got these big, massive, thick, I don't know, a piece of equipment that you just put snow in and melts it right on site and goes right into the stormwater. I mean,
Or, or we truck it or something, or, that's what we do, some of our other properties are much tighter North Shore, things that you do have capability, so we have to truck it off. Just like any commercial downtown, sometimes you gotta truck it, sometimes you don't, just depends on, you have Town Square building, you have the Domino's and the pet store, they don't have parking back there, I mean, a little bit, but it's all shared back there too, so. It's not municipal over there, but we work together back there and trying to scoop as much stuff, and if there's room to park it in someone's corner, so you don't have to have the expense to move it, so, I mean, you know, so the short answer is, you know, like, what do the townhomes do right now, technically? I mean, it's just, I'm not sure what they do. I think they pile it up between the, you know, things like this high or something. I don't know, you just kind of figure it out, and there's not a,
I think snow
perfect
removal
answer
is
for
gonna be
everything.
part of the agenda, that's what I'm getting at. That's what
Yeah.
I'm driving at.
yeah.
That's all there is to it. And then,
Perhaps there would be a possibility of taking the small lot that's just south of the office building, and you maybe have to close that, or have, you know, somehow have that area for snow storage, and people just can't park there when there's a snow event.
Just touching back on the retail piece of it, I think that is important. I somewhat agree with you, Sam, in that, you know, that's maybe not the best and people don't go there, but you have to think, we're now gonna have potentially 200 people living right there that we don't have now, and that's the whole idea. You know, you need rooftops or door fronts. They always say the doors come before the stores. So when you get people living downtown, that's the whole idea of a vibrant downtown. The restaurants and shops, they're all gonna come after that is. So I would try to hold on that as much as you can. I think 28 or 2,600 square feet, and it looks like there's about 20-some spots right in front of that.
Yep.
If most retailers had that, they'd be happy to have that many spots for that amount of square footage. So I think that's a great layout down there on the
Yeah,
south end.
yeah, and this is just another piece of downtown. You know, there is another vacant lot to the west, and I think there's a great opportunity for some really nice retail right there. 10,000 square feet, great parking off Centennial and 61 off the roundabout, awesome. I think that's the next piece for something to happen once this happens here. It's just gonna kind of perpetuate itself, and then, because people find opportunities with the new rooftops downtown, so. Yeah, good stuff.
Should we open it? Actually, quick check-in with Abby. How are we doing on question points,
I
feedback?
think, I mean, for staff, I think that you've touched on all of the high points, all the areas of variation for the PUD. I think, you know, for me, being able to work with the development team moving forward, I have enough direction. I think I would probably want to turn it to Dan to see if there's any
100%.
additional feedback that they were specifically hoping for this evening.
100%. Floor is
Yeah.
yours.
John, do you have anything before I start here?
No, I think that we've been provided with some really good feedback, and I gotta say that I've been encouraged by the feedback, so I don't have anything more.
Great. So we went to the planning commission twice, got really good feedback there, good direction, and just, you've spent the time, thank you so much for the questions. This is a significant project here, so we just really value the time we can spend in workshops and just kind of cut to the chase a little bit to see what the main concerns are. So, yeah, I don't really have anything else than that. Just thank you for your time, and just appreciate all the feedback.
Yeah. Council, any other final questions, final thoughts? Just open it up.
Just thank you for your hard work on this. We're looking forward to having that quadrant of the city developed, and we really appreciate your time and investment in this project.
You're welcome. Yeah,
Exciting.
my pleasure.
It's good, yeah.
Yeah. I'm super excited about this project. We need a project of this scale, and that project of its scale, I think, is going to require residential in this world that we are currently in. And so I'm happy to see that it is not just fully residential, that there is a mix. I think we've talked about good public amenities and just opportunity for public amenities. And it's a sizable redevelopment project in our historic downtown, and we know that there's going to be challenges that come with that. And so we are here to partner with you to help make something successful. So we're excited. I'm personally excited, and I think you've sent some optimism here tonight.
Yeah, thanks. And just one other note, it gets about 60 people or units to face the lake. So another 60 people downtown to enjoy the lake.
Right.
So it really, again, it just, for the boat club and for the slips downtown, I mean, it's going to create some really, really good action. So,
And underutilized space today, that entire 2-block area is
Yeah.
just incredibly underutilized.
Yeah.
And so this kind of we've got great vibrancy happening on the north end of downtown with Lighthouse Lofts and the Smith Coffee Shop.
yeah,
And this just kind of pulls that through the park, pulls that south, and kind of bookending now 2 great projects in our downtown, I think just provides a great opportunity for what's going to happen in the middle. So, yeah,
awesome.
keep us posted.
All right,
All
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks, Abby.
Yep, thank you.
Difficult
John.
project, so thanks a lot.
All right, we are going to transition to our next workshop topic tonight, which is an update and discussion on wetland banking.
Thank you again, Mayor Bain, members of the council. So part of this tonight is an update for the council, kind of just really seeking some policy direction more than anything. For new councilors who might not have been as familiar, following along, a little bit of an introduction, but trying to keep us along. So just as a high level, in June of last year, the city initiated a moratorium on wetland banking. Wetland banking is the creation of new wetlands. Sometimes it can be the restoration or improvement of wetlands. And then what ends up happening is a conservation easement is placed over that wetlands. That wetland is given a value, that value is converted to credits, and developers can purchase those credits when they need to mitigate their wetland impacts. So I'm a developer, and I've got a wetland, and I'm gonna fill it in. That is an impact. I need to mitigate that impact by either creating wetlands someplace else or buying credits. That's the really high level, if you didn't already know, and hopefully that made sense to everybody. I feel pretty good I can get that quickly now down. Wetland banking in the state of Minnesota is managed by the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. There's 10 wetland bank service areas within the state. Forest Lake happens to fall right in between 2 service areas. I don't think you can, unfortunately can't see my pointer. Let's see if I can, just a second here. Right in here, we're right in here. We fall in between the BSA 6 and BSA 7. So BSA 6 encompasses Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. BSA 7 is encompassing Rice Creek Watershed District. There are active banks and credits in both of those BSAs. So our developers do have the option to purchase credits. Credits are available if somebody is going to come in today and say, I'm going to impact this wetland. I can't replace it on my site. I'm going to purchase credit somewhere. They have option to purchase credit somewhere. So there isn't necessarily this overwhelming need for our development community to have to create or allow for wetlands within the city limits. So when looking at, so part of this is a little bit of an analysis for us to determine where do we go forward, right? We've initiated this year moratorium. During this time, we're obligated to really take a look and figure out what do we want to do here. We can't just do nothing. So I noted in my staff report, we kind of looked at a little bit of the land use analysis for the city. Currently, we have 38% of our land is undeveloped and 16% is agricultural. So we have about another almost 50% of our land area, a little less than 50% of our land area that still has some development opportunities within the city. Now, that being said, 35% of our land area is wet. It is surface water, or it is a stream, or it is a known wetland. The really interesting thing is that just about every single one of our wetlands, so the National Wetland Inventory might say it's this big, by the time the delineation of that's done, that wetland is bigger. And for all of the wetlands within Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District, there is a buffer. So even though the wet area is there, we have a buffer around it. So even though 35% of our land area is wet, we suspect that to be much higher. So overall, the allowance of wetland banking within the city would create more wetland. It would take land from the developable land area, and it would, in time, potentially reduce tax base. Because currently that land has a value. Once you put a conservation easement on that land has less value, just inherently. There's intrinsic value, and I want to say there's no value. So that would, and I went through some slides here, included them in there to show you just kind of our wet areas. Everything yellow here, those are our wetlands. That's really a lot of wet land in the city limits. It's odd to me that it's yellow. I feel like it should be blue, but I didn't get to delineate the color there, So initially, I think all of us would kind of suggest that we should outright just prohibit wetland banking, right? We have a lot of wet land. But one of the adverse impacts to that is our development community they have other areas to find credits, but if their credits were local, maybe that helps keep the money in the local community. The other aspect is the city has to purchase wetland credits. So when we have road reconstruction projects, if we have an impact to a wetland, often than not, we're not able to create wetland elsewhere. So we're gonna have to mitigate that impact, and we purchase credits. So if we allowed for wetland banking, it would just give both private and public benefit on a local level. So I did talk about this with the Planning Commission. We talked a little bit about zoning code and subdivision. So the Planning Commission did talk about the allowance of the consideration of wetland banking, possibly in what we call our conservancy zoning district. So this is the Lamprey Pass, I believe is what it's called, the WMA in the southwest corner. I think some people refer to it as the Big Swamp. I don't know.
Big swamp.
It's a big swamp,
Been there.
so there's probably some more formal names out there. And then this is another WMA that both of those are managed pretty much in conjunction with the DNR. There is quite a bit of land area through here that is not wetland, but is conservation land, or conservancy district. The purpose of the conservancy district is to conserve, natural resource lands. We do have a couple pieces of property up off the northeast side too, and the city's Bixby Park, even though it's being shown as park and recreation here, that's not actually a zoning, that's the land use district. That also is the conservancy district zone. So there could be some opportunities in those areas of conservancy where you can kind of, fill in the missing puzzle piece, so to say. You might be able to create some banking opportunities in between existing wetlands. And that would be an option certainly for those agricultural property owners or property owners that have less desirable land to add some potential value to those individual landowners. The Planning Commission also discussed this as part of a potential residential subdivision. And I thought I had included in my report here, my PowerPoint, but Fairview Farms was a subdivision that was approved in Stillwater Township. There's quite a bit of wetland associated. It's about 10 acres of wetlands were credited for the banking program, although almost 100 acres of land were encompassed by the conservation easement. So 10% of the land was actually wet, 90% of the land got locked up. None of the credits were purchased. I don't know entirely what that scenario is. I would need to do a little bit more research. But since the time of the Planning Commission meeting, staff has been a little bit more concerned that wetland banking as part of a development might not be appropriate because at least in one scenario in the city, it didn't work. for whatever reason. So that's a really high level of here's where we are today, a little bit of policy analysis, a little bit of considerations. I wrote in the staff report some very kind of specific things for the council to start providing city staff with direction on. One is, should we outright ban wetland banking within the city? We have until June to make that decision. However, if we're going to allow for wetland banking, well, regardless, even if we outright ban it, we need to create an ordinance to memorialize our decision. And that can be a couple-month process. Staff has built in the review schedule that I included in my staff report about, what are we at now? I think it's just a little over 3 months. That's quite enough time for us. But more than anything, by this time next month, we really need to start moving forward with having very clear direction, because this isn't something that a lot of communities codify, which is fine. I don't know that there's as many communities that would be concerned, because maybe they have less wetlands and they want more than we want. But tonight, seeking the direction from the council, really specifically on, are we moving towards prohibition on wetland banking or some allowance? And if some allowance, if there's some sort of districts that you'd like us to start looking into. And that's it. You have any questions for me?
Thank you, Abby. Council, just open it up, feedback, questions?
Yeah, a couple questions. So if I understood you correctly, if we ban it, then developers have to go outside of city limits to buy the credits. And the challenge there is that we're not keeping the money local.
That could be a challenge. Yep. I mean,
And ideally, by banning it, that enables us to develop all that land potentially, which would ultimately, in the long run, drive up the tax base potentially.
well, everywhere that's shown on the map right now, that kind of pockmarked yellow is a wetland. We can't fill all of these wetlands. That's just we don't want to necessarily do that.
True. No.
If, let's just say, let's not pick an area we're really actively developing right now. And like right in this area along County Road 50, let's say somebody came in to develop this right here and there were wetland impacts. The developer of this would be able to purchase credits outside of the city today. Or if we had a wetland banking program, they could purchase them from a local, owner as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's no guarantee that money would stay local, though.
Sure. And so by saying we don't want any more, we're just telling the landowners that we're not going to give you the option to curate that revenue stream with your wetland, basically. One of the challenges, right?
That would be a challenge. It wouldn't necessarily be taking them away from any rights that they have right now, because really we can't determine that anybody has that right now. That's part of what we're determining.
Well, but if I own a piece of property that has wetland and I'm allowed to have that labeled as wetland and I could sell that credit, that's a value to me as a landowner, right?
Yes, so in order to be classified as a bank, it needs to be new wetland. So not the yellow that you see today. It would have to be, this in here, this high dry land gets converted to
Got it.
a bank. Or if it's one of those yellows, it more than likely needs to be improved significantly. So it might be a low quality wetland that somebody goes in and, I don't know, dredges and plants new plants and
Okay.
tosses a bunch of frogs in. Or I don't know. That's just, they do something, it gets that designation. But if you just have a standard wetland or you're part of the swamp area, it's not necessarily, that's not a bank.
Abby, is the portion that's in the turquoise, right where your cursor is right now?
Yep.
That is the conservatory district,
Yep,
what's the word I'm looking for?
conservancy.
Conservancy district. Is that already, because it's in the conservancy district, is that already not eligible for development?
It's, It's not that it's not eligible for development, it's just very limited development. I think if you have a single-family home in the Conservancy zoning district, you're allowed to have it, but I don't know that necessarily new homes are allowed.
Okay.
So they do have very limited development rights compared to any other zoning district.
If we were, and what I understand is within that district, there might be land that is not currently considered wetland, that potentially we could take developable land between two pockets and allow for them to be conjoined and allow that property owner to have that economic benefit. But we haven't, because that already, because of the district classification and already just the land current characteristics, it's not, we're not significantly reducing developable land, is that, am I
Correct.
understanding that
That
correctly?
is correct, yes. The Conservancy district properties have limited development rights. And so if we consider this wetland banking as a development right in the Conservancy district, it's not like we would be taking necessarily high, dry, suitable subdivision land and allowing it to be banked. It would be taking probably already lower, lesser quality land and allowing that to be banked.
And that designation of eligibility for wetland banking, is that a permanent designation
It is.
forever?
Forever. The bank can be, the credits can be purchased, and then once they're purchased, you know, it isn't really a bank anymore,
Right.
but it's always permanently on record, forever under conservation easement.
I appreciate, go ahead.
So is any of this, you mentioned early on about the negative on the city is it takes it off the tax rolls? Is it lesser of a taxable? I mean, but if it becomes banked, is that all public land and then it's not taxable?
It's not public land, it's still privately owned land with a conservation easement on it. And generally, land with a conservation easement on it, because it is not developable, has inherently less to no value.
Okay, so there,
Abby, what's the ratio between taking away an acre of wetland and buying the wetland? Is it like 2 to 1?
Yeah, so if you fill a wetland today, and let's say you fill a whole acre, you have to create or buy credit for 2 acres elsewhere.
2 acres somewhere else. It's roughly, I think that changes a little bit, doesn't it? There's certain scenarios where,
I think it's based on quality and the land and the soil type, and there's a few different factors, but generally, it can go up to, I think, 2.2 actually, or 2.5. But generally speaking, yes, I think it's a 2 to 1 on a good quality wetland. Now, that being said, I don't know the quality of all our wetlands to know exactly what that ratio is.
so maybe I missed this, or maybe just a little history with not being on the council. Was there just a run on people requesting these wetland banking, and so we had to put a moratorium on them to hold that ground so that we don't lose that revenue?
We heard that there was interest in the community, and there was concern just because there is limited developable, high and dry developable land area. And because we had never really done the analysis, that was part of the consideration. I will say, we enacted the moratorium like a month after I came, and it was something that had been talked about with Bolton and Mink, former planning staff, and the legal counsel was making that recommendation.
And we, in absence of the moratorium or in absence of us doing something coming out of the moratorium, because it's not prohibited, is it inherently allowed?
It's
Or-
not necessarily inherently allowed, but there was this whole question of, if we didn't do something, could it have been inherently allowed? That makes sense? Like, there's a risk that you run of a whole landowner getting, far into a process that give him some sort of vested right that we aren't adequately addressing. We just hadn't really done any analysis in our code to even see, and we don't address it in our code. We do say wetlands are allowed, and we want to protect wetlands. Well, if somebody goes and creates a bank and didn't need to get permission from us, is that now giving them something that we now have to protect? So it was a concern more than anything, because we have limited, really high, dry, developable land, that there could be something that could be adversely created in the community.
That was the reason I voted for that moratorium. I was part of that vote. And it just didn't seem to make sense to create an acre of developable land because we're getting rid of a wetland, to create 2 acres somewhere else that becomes a conservatory property. To me, the math didn't work out. We have so many wetlands here already that it just didn't, you know. But the moratorium, as far as I'm concerned, was the moratorium was to be able to have this conversation.
Yes. agreed.
That's what it was all
Agree.
about. Let's fall back, take a look at this, and get it right.
I would agree.
And that's really a monster, so.
I flip-flop on this. On one side, I kind of like property rights, it's the homeowners or the landowners, it's their property, their option to do, as they choose with it, and we should have, limited influence, especially in some of these more rural districts, or rural parts of the community. My challenge is that it's a permanent designation. It's not like someone's putting up a structure where we might say, yeah, we don't really love that structure, but it's in a agricultural, district, and they can do that if that's what they want. That's that structure has a 20-year life, and certainly has a mechanism to change it should somebody else come around and the market changes and the land use changes and you want to go down a different path. And I just know the level of care that we have in our zoning code on those things that are, by nature, far more temporary than something like this, where we're permanently changing the classification. And I just think that's where there is broader public concern and more of a public use, where, especially if you have, this market creates certain parcels that become advantageous, there you could have outside investors, because we happen to be lax on rules, we become kind of a magnet to those types of investors who might be looking for those properties. So I appreciate that we had to do the moratorium, and I think I'm happy we're having this conversation. I do think there are opportunities where it may make sense, where we have in very limited use, maybe probably where we're in a conservancy district, that it may just make sense, because the reality is also we buy these and we need there to be a market. And maybe that is a win for some of those current property owners that otherwise have limited value. Maybe that kind of lets that free market piece play out, but in a very controlled use, because again, it's a permanent consideration that there's not many things we do that are permanent, and this is one. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, well, my question would be too, a lot of developments were putting in holding ponds, stormwater control, that kind of thing. When we develop one of these ponds, is that eligible for sale as conservatory property?
Not a stormwater pond on a development. This would be its own separate thing that you are developing.
Still a wetland, but that's why I'm asking about that. You're still creating a wetland regardless.
Yeah, stormwater ponds are not eligible.
Okay, that answers the question.
Other points of feedback, concerns? I think you're also maybe asking what other questions might we have at this point that should be considered as this comes forward? You're asking the right questions, I guess.
If there was if you had a piece of property that's questionable, they really wouldn't make a good developable piece of land, but it's really not a wetland, it's kind of right on the edge.
Right.
Maybe that's something that we should consider for doing that, but how do you identify those properties,
Well,
And
that's,
so,
yeah, and that's a good question. That's kind of why I go back to what do we already have in place with some of those districts where we've already, from a designation standpoint, already from a tax base said, for example, this area, the turquoise area already is naturally designated in that area. So maybe to allow it there provides some benefit that doesn't currently exist to those properties without putting other developable land at risk.
maybe there's some way where we could look at each request, and I hate to delay these things, but that's the problem, you add more bureaucracy by doing that too. And So it'd be nice if we had some kind of a,
Councilmember Husnick does,
Line.
yeah, Councilmember Husnick does bring up a great question, is what is the process then for those projects? Is there an application and a consideration where planning commission's looking at these, or what does that process look like post?
That would all be part of the things we still have yet to figure out. So,
A recommended path, or would you rather, would the path be more that we, I don't know, is there generally a path of requiring approval and
The-
permitting
I
of
mean,
some sort?
the Bowser? The Bowser? I don't know, it sounds
Bowser.
really funny. It actually sounds like a dog's name to me, that's just
It
one
does.
of, but Bowser, is the controlling entity, they are the managing entity in this. And so the local, the applicant would work, or the landowner would work probably with the local watershed district, the conservation district, and Bowser to establish it. The city has a local role in that, I'm not exactly sure. If we've already got, 3 other governments, I would say that we'd want to have a hand in being informed and being a part, but I would love to let others manage that because they have more technical expertise than our resources are
so
capable.
do they have any kind of a policy, on how we determine what piece of property would be eligible for that development, or is it a vague thing, or what do we?
Well, I mean, they're looking at requests that come before them. I think it's up to, it's a different type of developer, right? Now we've got wetland bank developers, and they are seeking land like our residential land subdividing developers. And so they are the ones that are really looking out. Like, I think we could probably do some sort of analysis of which lands in the city are more desirable than others. I just think that we're probably spinning wheels and trying to figure out, is land, I think I can look at a map right now and say everywhere there isn't a pockmark, a yellow pockmark on that map is potential, right? Because there isn't a significant natural resource there. So I think, when we're looking at the thought of, so I brought up Fairview Farms, and Fairview Farms coming into this because they had done this once, right? It's 22 lots, a residential subdivision, 100 acres gets tied up. If we want to look at that scenario, that there is some other development happening, and wetland banking is a part of that other development, I think we can start to explore what that could look like. I'm just a little cautious because we've done it once and it didn't work. Now, I can do more research to figure out why that didn't work and what are some of the background between that. But I think when it comes down to it, writing the law for how we implement that is going to get really tricky. We'll definitely lean on all of our partners out there, our legal team. We'll talk more with Bowser, our watershed district, the conservation district, but ultimately it comes down to a local land use control. And at the time of subdivision, what is that catalyst to say, yes, that acreage on that side can be wetland, but the rest needs to be residential subdivision.
When you say on the other project that the banking didn't work, what is it that didn't work?
The credits never were sold.
Could there be all sorts of other reasons? Maybe the credits weren't ever marketed, or maybe
Yes.
maybe it turned out that they really didn't have a project appetite for that to be part of their portfolio. I mean, are there all of those other reasons on why?
Yeah, there could be. They were decertified, and so those are things I can figure out too. It could be that they were decertified because the program was established and the rules changed. Could it, and then they decertified everybody under, I don't know enough about that. I can do some more investigation into Fairview Farms.
I think it's interesting to know more facts about it. I'm not sure the fact that one failed is too much of a red flag to me. There's all sorts of reasons why development plans don't come into fruition. Now, if in that discovering that, you find information that becomes meaningful that we should consider, absolutely. But I'm not overly concerned because there was one that didn't get fully developed, I'm not sure that that is too much of a red flag for me.
You're right, I think, it- you know, if there's a development, okay, we're gonna say in this piece of square paper here, whether or not we would allow a trade-off within the development.
Right.
Under some sort of direction or rule or improvement, you know, being approved through the watershed district or Bowser or the city of Forest Lake. And maybe we could look at it, you know, each one of those individually, because it'd be part of the planning process anyways. So,
So initially, when staff had brought this to the planning commission, we had thought that maybe there's some consideration in like a Fairview Farms, or let's just say, we all been looked at Hidden Creek recently, right? Maybe in Hidden Creek, if you put in less homes in this area and that becomes a bank, maybe that's okay. The planning commission seemed favorable to exploring that. I certainly can keep moving down that road to look at what other types of districts or scenarios, other than maybe that conservancy zoning district, that it would be, could be appropriate. I think, I'd need to be back here at no later than another month with us to have this final discussion so that I'm not walking too far down a road and doing too much unnecessary research on it.
I think I finally understand the connection you're making with this project, and my concern on allowing it as part of an overall development plan is that, my concern is that the developer becomes very myopic around how do I make this particular parcel work? And that end result ends up being a permanent land use change that is forever, when other times we see parcels redevelop and things get replatted and change, things just happen in natural evolution of life that we've taken off the table in this scenario that makes me just nervous on a lot, because at the end of the day, what we're doing in that scenario is we are taking good developable land and we're giving that tool to a developer to make a potential development, a project work on a parcel, and it's the permanency of that gives me some concern. But let me talk to the flip side. The flip side, which I'm kind of intrigued by, is if that does make certain parcels, because if, Abby's map has so many pockets of yellow on it, if that does make certain parcels more likely to be developed, that maybe there is some overall common good there.
the legal.
Playing
issues
out
might have
that
to look at too.
calculus is just challenging, and it's the permanency that just makes me a little cautious.
Do you have any idea what the economics are on this? Like, what is a credit worth?
So, granted, there's an investment in them, so if you had high dry land, you have to build that wetland, so there is an initial investment. I don't know what those costs are. But a credit in Bowser, the BSA 6, so that's Comfort Lake, Forest Lake, I think it's about $15,000 a credit. In BSA 7, which encompasses most of the rest of the metro region, it's almost $100,000 a credit. So there's definitely a strong interest in wetland banking, especially in BSA 7, because of the high cost per credit.
So how much of Forest Lake is in the higher valued credit district?
Let me just pull that back up.
It's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
Yeah, it goes to whoever creates that wetland,
Right.
but then it's off the tax roll too, at the same
No,
time.
for sure. But, I guess
What's that
that's,
piece of property worth?
There's a very small percentage of Forest Lake that is actually in BSA. I'm just going to try to zoom in here really quick. That's in BSA 6. Predominantly, we're in BSA 7.
which is a $15,000 credit value.
Yeah.
But
so-
that's a current value, right? Play that out of, 20 years and, that flips, that's just, probably driven based off of supply and demand and.
And where development is occurring right
Right.
now.
More
Right.
supply and demand, and it will be
Right.
a flat number,
So that
that's for sure.
15,000 today might be 35,000.
Sure.
And
So if, if you're doing a development in the higher value district, you have to buy in that district. You can't go to the cheaper district and buy.
You have to buy within the district.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So there's just less.
And there's also other factors of wetland quality and all these things that, really, to be honest with you, we don't want to dive into unless we have to. Like, we're not going in the deep end right now. We're just going to wade in the kiddie pool for a second. And
I guess like you said, I'm hesitant to, or maybe it was Mayor Bain that talked about it, but I mean, limiting property owners' rights. I mean, that's
Right.
a serious
It's
consideration.
economic value, yeah.
And if I'm that landowner and I sell out to a developer and I'm getting mine,
Right.
you know, yeah, I see the impact to the city future tax rolls for sure. If I'm gonna hold the land and develop that myself,
Right.
I'm essentially creating a worthless inheritance for my kids, or whatever the case might be.
so generally, I don't have a better map at the moment, but this is roughly Forest Lakes area, right up here-ish, right? We're right in the corner, I think. We don't go all the way to the boundary,
That
but
upper left corner, that's us.
most of us, is in that Comfort Lake Forest Lake. Now, that being said, most of that Comfort Lake Forest Lake, as I was noting earlier, is in the big swamp. So there definitely is a lot more, if I were a wetland developer, I would want to be developing in probably those areas that, one, we have higher, drier land in Rice Creek, but the value's there if I have the money to put into that program. So I hear that we're not quite at the point of outright ban. That it's certainly that's something that this council wants to keep exploring, most likely, but not for certain, not putting any words in anyone's mouth, in the Conservancy District, but what would be obviously implications to that? What might be the area that could be eligible, what wouldn't be? To maybe look at it as a part of a development scenario, but how we could do that we got a lot of control in that it's not necessarily taking all the high and dry land and it's all getting converted with one house, but that we still have our urban development pattern, and maybe this can be used as a complement to that. I'm seeing some heads nod.
I think that's a good way of saying it.
So, I've done this a time or two, Sam.
Yeah, would you mind repeating that?
Sure.
It's on
Here is, no.
roll tape.
So what I'll end up doing is I'll put together a little bit better of a scope, probably refining our timeline some. I didn't intend to bring this back to your next workshop, but I think it probably will, just to make sure as we start, before we really start drafting policy, that we're heading in the right direction. Maybe it's one of those things that with a little bit more information, you say, no, we're at the point of outright ban, and that's fine. But by about the middle to end of next month, we really have to start getting that ordinance drafted, whatever it may be, so.
One of the things we've learned with creation of ponds is that creating what should be a natural resource requires, if it's not currently there and we create it, it requires some level of maintenance to maintain its health. Background information I would just appreciate being able to read through would be just some history on how long have these credits, how long has wetland banking occurred? And do we know what this looks like in 5 years, in 10 years?
Sure.
What is,
I know that when you initiated the moratorium, when this council initiated the moratorium, Washington County Conservation District did reach out. They and Bowser are more than willing to help assist the city in just information. And so I will lean on them, might have them help produce some materials that maybe even here, who knows? But definitely will end up getting more information that way that gives you more idea of the longevity, the requirements, all the stuff.
just some background materials that we can, I don't mean for us to take workshop time and reviewing together, but just some background materials that we can review individually through, through email, I think would just be helpful. Again, just to know what is the history and how do these projects mature? Do they age well, I think is my question. Or do we find like our stormwater ponds that after 5 years, we have to spend a lot of money to dredge them and they're no longer of good health? And that's what I worry about.
We'll
is
never have enough money to maintain them.
What becomes, what,
Well, and what's nice is they're not public infrastructure, they're still owned by those landowners
but it
in
is current, it
perpetuity.
is still the land. I mean, I don't know. I just worry, what are we doing?
Yeah, well, and you also want assurances, I mean, it's a program managed by Bowser
Yes.
and the conservation districts, and then there's, conservation easements over it, and who's that easement manager, and how are they requiring the landowners? There's a lot, I think, of information we can put together that can help provide that for you.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank
All
you.
right, we are at the end of our planned agenda, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Also move.
We have a motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and we're adjourned.